Greetings, consumer, and welcome to the VIP Apocalypse Waiting Room. Please find your allocated seat, and thank you all so much for your gushing sentimentality for our repulsive power. Such mindless obedience will not be rewarded. Our hybrid android Homo sapien clones will serve you your complimentary hot dogs and pina coladas before the straps are closed and firmly shut around your limbs and throat. Soon your screams will echo unanswered down the deserted streets. Total destruction, as we have foretold, is now imminent, though it is my duty to inform you that we have experienced a slight delay to the apocalypse and your untold suffering. It seems our highly advanced system failed to detect the virus, a splinter cell, a branch of resistance known as the Discordians. Though you have our highest reassurance that our agents are now closing in on these perversions and will grind them down to atoms and dust, I assure you, reality really is under our control.
F23 Podcast!
Hello there, my beauties. I am Jamie Dodds, and welcome. For you are listening to the F23 Podcast. I think we might have just picked up a transmission there from the not too distant future. Or perhaps one of the universes next door. It's difficult for me to tell sometimes. Do not be alarmed though, as coming up today I have the wonderful being, the superb beastie that is Alexis Mincolla, lead singer of the awesome industrial band Three Teeth, and I recommend that you get some of their music into you at your soonest convenience. I really love this conversation, and we talk a lot about magic and get a lot of knowledge and wisdom from Alexis on this. And did I mention that he's a really super nice guy? Well, shit, he certainly is. And soon you will see for yourself. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of the F23 Podcast is brought to you by OK Comics. The actual shop is based in Leeds. However, they have a fantastic online presence, so it doesn't matter where you are, you can visit the online store and place regular or one-off orders. And take a look online at their special offers. I'm reading one currently. It's Enigma, the definitive edition, and it comes with a signed bookplate. Enigma was part of the new wave of comics back when the Vertigo line was very first launched, and I'm finally getting round to reading it all these many years later. It's often described as the first mainstream comic to have a gay superhero in the story. It's fantastic, and if you've not read it or you don't own it, get yourself to the online shop and order one with a signed bookplate while you still can. I've bought all my comics from OK ever since it opened, and that's why I'm happy to recommend them to you. A comic book shop run by comic book lovers for comic book lovers. How you all doing out there, seekers? Find me on social media and let me know. You will find my tags in the show notes. Actually, I have just deleted all my social media apps off my phone at the moment, and I'm redefining my relationship with social media. I am still on there quite regularly from time to time, so do come and find me and do come and talk to me. I hope you survived all those various storms. The wind was blowing wild. I want to catch up with an old friend who lives in Ohio, who I've not seen for 4.5 years, but he was here in the UK, and despite the storms, I drove where he was staying to go and visit. He's just qualified as an ayahuasca shaman, and we decided that we'd go for a walk on the beach. However, the angry god of the wind blew sand so crazily wild that we couldn't even make it to the beach. Just getting close, we were being whipped by the grains of sand in the high winds. It was so cool though, reconnecting and seeing and being in the presence of an old friend. Stay connected, lovelies. We've not had much chance to see our friends, family and loved ones over these last 2 years, so see people when you can. Okay, so here we go. I invited Alexis onto the show to talk sex, drugs and magic, having read his introduction to the new publication of a book by the same name by the Hilarious Press. It's by Robert Anton Wilson. Well, yep, we talk about that, especially magic. That's exactly what we do. And as I do love industrial music, you know, I couldn't resist slipping some of that into the conversation too. One of the things I've loved about doing this podcast is that over lockdown it has meant I've been able to have regular conversations with a whole bunch of brilliant people. Well, 37 such conversations. And what I didn't realise at the time was how beneficial to me and my well-being having contact with other humans and these conversations would be. Some of those conversations have been with people I know, and others, like this one, with people I'm meeting for the first time. I've got to say that even though we'd never met, I found Alexis a very easy person to connect with, who had a natural warmth and spirit of generosity that it's hard not to feel a meaningful connection. And so I hope that the conversation you're about to listen to successfully conveys some of that as well. So, wax up your moustaches, summon your guardian angel, and prepare yourself to be spun right round, and welcome to episode 37 of the F23 podcast, Alexis Mincolla.
Inquire within, you never know what you may find. Unscrew the inscrutable, think the unthinkable, dive down to the roots of your mind. Inquire within. Inquire within. Inquire within. Just don't believe all that you've seen. Use your perception to answer the question, who is the master who makes the grass green? Inquire within.
You can call me Lex, you could call me Alexis, you could call me Dave if you want. I'm down for whatever you want.
All right. Well, I'll go with Lex because it's how you it's on your email signature. So hello, Lex. Welcome to the F23 podcast. Thank you very much for finding an hour of your time today to come on.
How's it going, Yeah, how's it going, Jamie? Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, wicked. No, it's all good, really. Yeah, I've just put my put my boys down to bed, and feeling quite happy. They've been they're lovers of the moon. They always kind of have been, right? And they're just sort of getting they're 3.5 years old, and they're just getting their head around sequences. So like days of the week, going, and what day of the week it is and the order they follow. And they're also they've been aware of the moon phases, but they're realizing now that they go in a sequence. And they were desperate to see the half moon. They knew it had gone from crescent to half moon, but it's just been cloudy or misty every night. But last night they got to see the half moon. They were ecstatic. They're like, yay.
That's so fun. That's such a time period where your imagination and that sort of childlike curiosity is really starting to kind of blossom in ways that you're kind of like piecing things together. And what a better way to kind of pique the imagination than the moon? I mean, the moon sort of it's sort of inspired people's imagination since the dawn of time. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you can see why, they discovered it for themselves. They didn't need any encouragement from me, it's their own discovery. And it's one of the paybacks of being a parent. I mean, yeah, it's hard work, but being around these little humans that find life so engaging and enthusiastic and inspiring, it's a nice energy to be around. It rubs off on you, right?
Absolutely. It's pure, that sort of curiosity of I almost look at that as the fool card versus the magician. It's important to have the balance of both of that zero and that one card of the tarot where, that curiosity, that sort of precociousness is something that we kind of learn our way out of as adults. And I think it's so important to sort of try and keep, that childlike curiosity that I'm talking about. And I think whenever I'm around children, because I have a nephew as well, and I get to be the cool uncle, which is
nice.
A lot less responsibility, but a ton of fun. And whenever I'm around them, it's like I kind of get to see things through their eyes again, and there's something really refreshing and pure about that I think is really special.
For sure. Right, well, yeah. I was hoping we could start our conversation with a bit of a chat about magic, if that's good with you.
Yeah, that seems like a perfectly good segue into that.
Yeah. So what is magic, Lex, and why is it often like a taboo?
Yeah, magic is, for me, I've gone through a lot of stages with my sort of understanding and practice of magic, and sort of ended up on this sort of very practical approach, as opposed to, putting on some robes and LARPing around my apartment with a sword. But, I find that magic is incredibly, subjective and sort of personal quest for a lot of people, but just kind of strip it down and sort of binary existence. To me, magic is focus plus imagination. And I think that those are the two things that I've always kind of stripped it down to. Whereas no matter what I'm doing, if I'm approaching with a level of focus and really sort of spirited imagination, interesting things start to happen. It's as simple as that. If you want to look at it as, the art and the act of sort of, aligning one's will and sort of creating action with that, and, hoping for results, is a different story. But I do think that for me, it's just really been stripped down to those two things: is focus and imagination.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And what kind of results have you seen then from
I
that?
think that, for me, it's whenever I'm really creating, when I'm creating for results, I find that there's less results. If I'm creating out of this sort of a true will and something that is I'm passionate about and I really care about, and I need to sort of get it out of my head and into a sort of manifested form, I find that then it generally has, the intention is more pure, and I find that there is more results. But again, I think that it's tough to sort of wish for results while performing magic. I see these like ads now on social media about like, do you want to use like using magic to accumulate the wealth that you deserve? And I just want to blow my brains out. I don't think it's like a, magic shouldn't be a Ponzi scheme. Magic should be something that is at its core, the intangible properties of existence, the space that is, everyone approaches things with so much certainty these days. And I find that magic should be that the things that we can't fully understand, and we sort of have to surrender to in those sort of, subtle energies that exist, and sort of keying in with those, I think, is important. So it shouldn't be such a material quest in my mind.
I like it. Yeah. And I guess like what I'm kind of was going through my head listening to sort of like, take on things there is this idea that like, magical practice, magical thinking, rather than sort of being about being in control or trying to measure or be results focused. It's more about taking us to a place where anything is possible. Yeah.
It's sort of surrendering to the question mark in life, and sort of being able to exist and appreciate that without a sense of anxiety or fear. The idea that, there's, beautiful forces of nature in this world that we'll never have control over. There's things that with all our infinite wisdom and science and theories that we'll still never be able to understand. And I think that goes back to, again, what we're talking about, that childlike curiosity, which is such a pure, beautiful state to exist in. And the older we get, the more certain we get of things, and the more that we like to say, hey, we understand everything. And we sort of become, these sort of like hardened creatures, you know what I mean? And I feel like, looking at some of the allegories of man being made out of clay, I always kind of find that funny, that like in the beginning it's malleable, but the older we get, the kind of harder and brittle it gets. And I think that it's important to sort of retain some of that sort of malleability in order to sort of have, those magical energies still coursing through us,
Yeah, man. So how does magic affect our consciousness?
I think magic can affect our consciousness through a self-awareness as well. I think it can, a myriad of ways, but, offhand, I feel like magical thinking requires a lot of introspection, a lot of internal dialogue, a lot of internal listening, understanding, this vessel that is our sort of primary vehicle, our body, and our mind and our spirit. And I think really trying to connect those dots and listen and make an assessment of where we're at, where we need to go is, creating some roadmap for ourselves. I think it's funny. I don't think a lot of people actually do that. It seems something that's like very basic. I have to think about, people can change a tire on their car, which is like their secondary vehicle, but very infrequently can we do diagnostic on our primary vehicle, which is our body and our mind and our spirit. And I feel like we're very disconnected from our sort of ourselves in that respect. And I feel like, whether it's through meditation or whether it's through the creation of art, and, magic can be these, very small goals. It can be these very huge goals. It could be just waking up with a positive outlook on life, or it could potentially be creating a great artistic work of your will that is going to enact change in the rest of the world. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be the small little things that, are repatterning your thought process. The ability to sort of use, for example, I think of a ritual or like something like a Liber Resh Vel Helios, where it's like, waking up, at dawn and doing your solar adoration, while at noon doing a solar adoration, at sundown doing a solar adoration, and then at midnight doing a solar adoration, to sort of put your body in a biorhythm with the actual universe and the sun, as an act of discipline, which is people hate doing Liber Resh Vel Helios, from what I understand. But I find that, it's one of those things that if you start to do that and train your mind to be the center of your universe because you're becoming empowered with the sun, I find that something like that could have tremendous value on, repowering one's brain, sort of tearing through the neuroplasticity of whatever rut they might be in. And I find that, magical thinking allows people to essentially have greater control over their self,
Wow. And I guess, one of the key themes there you talk about is repatterning, right? And if repatterning, it might be an easy thing to say, but it's a damn sight harder process to do, right? And that's and that's just that's just because a lot of them sort of imprints were made in our early years, and some of them we're not even aware of, and that kind of thing. So that element of if you are serious about going on that journey, that idea that this is work, this is discipline, is kind of
they call it the great work for a reason, and as much as we can talk about something being a simple idea, that doesn't mean it's easy, like those disciplines of something like Liber Resh Vel Helios. It's pretty simple, but it's very challenging. And I feel like most things that are quite simple are actually quite hard. Whether it's writing a simple song, it can be very challenging. So there's something really tough about finding and achieving that simplicity in life in general, especially when we live in such a complex existence now. And I find that, I think that it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about initially, with that sort of childlike curiosity, the simplicity of the way that we were when we were very young. I find that also sort of at the bookends, like where we enter this world and where we leave the world, is probably the most simplistic aspects of our existence, as a child or as a very old person. But in the middle, things seem to get very complicated. So maybe it's because they're closer to the entrance and the exit. And what maybe exists on either side of those things, it might be sort of a more pure state. But, I feel like everywhere in between, we have to sort of remember that, and I go back to the sort of binary sequencing of the sort of magician and the fool, because I think they're two sides of the same coin. And, when getting caught up in magic and sort of overthinking and doing this sort of self-auditing, can sort of complicate the process as well. And I think that that's important to sort of be able to sort of oscillate between the fool, which, is sort of existing in that sort of wide-eyed, precocious state of kind of, bliss and almost seeming unawareness, and just sort of enjoying the moment, as opposed to just the magician, who sometimes can become a bit jaded because you're thinking about the future and the past and the now and all these things to sort of connect all those dots. But I think that we have to remember as magicians that it's really important to reside in oscillate between both of those facets, which I always find it funny, because in the tarot, those systems, the 0 is the fool and the 1 is the magician. And we live in a world of 1s and 0s now almost entirely. And I think that we have to create our own sort of digital sequences for, the right, situation in order to create that balance. And
well, I guess, we're communicating now thanks to that system of ones and zeros.
Sense of those ones and zeros, exactly.
Yeah, man. Wow. Yeah, and I guess it's how do you get that balance then? How do you get, because we've got to have fun, we've got to be open minded, right? We've got to be able to laugh, at the cosmic joke, but then there's that balance, right? We have to, an element of it we have to take. It's a practice. It's the work. We have to take it. We have to take an element of it serious too.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's about kind of creating the right binary sequence for the right sort of situations and the right moments in time, where sometimes it's going to create you need more ones than zeros and more zeros than ones. And I think that, that's important to remember. And, in terms of deciding how much needs, magician level thought and how much needs fool thought, is really going to be up to the practitioner. But, needless to say, I think we can all understand when it's, important to sort of be lighthearted and silly and fun. It's almost like thoughtfulness and sort of, or mindfulness and mindlessness are equally important in this. You know what I mean? Where it's like, we do have to be very mindful, but if you're so mindful and you can't appreciate, you can't take a joke, then, you're going to be crushed by this planet. You know what I mean? Like, if you can't have a laugh at yourself, you don't stand a chance.
Yeah. So how does magic then sort of shape the self? How does it sort of feed into our values, beliefs, the person that you are?
I mean, for me, I'm just trying to think about when I got into magic and what my thought process is like before and after. And, there's a lot of things to me that I felt like were intrinsic to my behavior and my thought process and my existence before I was even aware of magic. And I didn't really get into magic until my freshman year in college, ironically, where I had done I was living in Rome at the time and studying political science. And I used to hang out in front of a statue in Campo dei Fiori, underneath a statue of Giordano Bruno, who's later I found out was burned at the stake there. And wow. I loved the statue and I thought it was very cool. And I was talking to my history professor and he explained to me, who Giordano Bruno was and how he was deemed a heretic by the Vatican for his, explorations into, astronomy and sort of like Neoplatonism and the Hermetic arts and all these things. And I was like, well, this is crazy. I don't know what any of this stuff is, but I do think that statue's cool. It resonated with me. He was this sort of cloaked character with a mustache. And I just sort of saw a little bit of myself in it.
Yeah.
And granted, I used to drink a couple bottles of wine, smoke a hash joint out of there, as one does when living in Italy and studying in college. And I just sort of went down a rabbit hole of wanting to learn about him. And I think as a result of that, I started to kind of find, it literally turns into that rabbit hole where you just an infinite study of wanting to learn more as you sort of, go into I want to learn about the Renaissance magicians, and I'm, upwards into more of the Western esoteric tradition, into the occult. And, then you start learning about the Golden Dawn and the OTO. And next thing you know, you're studying with characters from there. And for me, it's just been a lifelong study of the human experience. And I find that, it's been very enriching to how I approach things, especially without that sort of certainty that I feel like can really corrupt the human. No matter what, I have a great appreciation for science, but I can also see that science is also flawed by virtue of the fact that all we are is a central nervous system that can interpret data. And we use language and numbers, which are also probably limiting to the idea that there's just more out there. So the idea that, I like to just sort of be comfortable and surrender to the question mark, the great question mark of, we don't even know why we're here. And, to have an appreciation for the sort of, the powers that we can't see. And, for lack of a better term, calling that magic, or, for lack of a better term, calling something a higher power, whatever that is, you know what I mean? We don't even have language to sort of describe certain things. It's like when you're on a big LSD trip or something and you just start grunting and making noises because language just feels limited. You know what I mean? There's aspects to, drug experimentation that have, I think, catalyzed levels of conscious as well. And we can get into drugs in magic, and how I think they interface with each other in sort of precarious ways. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't even remember what your original question was.
I was just, I was
rambling.
Fascinating stuff. I was just, like I said, I was kind of curious as to sort of like how it shapes the self and how it shapes our beliefs. And like, I was really interested to hear about sort of like, well, that you lived in Italy and that's how you sort of like, and it was there that your journey began.
I think magic can really rewire the brain. And you're talking about certain levels of, even like when you look at magic and you look at word as like spell, the idea that even sort of performing a ritual 4 times a day and saying those words out loud and using your body as a vessel of, performing whatever thing you're doing, you are going to repattern some of the neuroplasticity that we've created in our brains. And it can be very rewarding in that respect, in terms of, calming the mind and disciplining sort of the soul, because I do think that any great work of art is mostly discipline. The idea that we're all walking around hugely inspired all the time to create really cool work is not really the truth. The idea that it's, this age-old maxim of, 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. The idea is that you do have to put in the work.
Yeah.
And the idea that I think magic can really serve as a spiritual practice for disciplining the mind, the body, and the soul.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess, like, one of the things you kind of said earlier on was like, like an act of magic can be like, waking up with a positive attitude every day, or producing a great sort of like, paradigm shifting work of art. I think I'm paraphrasing a bit there, but even just that, for some people, a discipline, a practice that connects you with something, connects you with, with an experience that's sort of like beyond the scientific explanation or beyond the rational mind. But just to wake up with a positive attitude every day. I mean, that in itself sounds like that in
itself is a huge victory in today's world.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not easy. We're sort of looking. Everyone's feeling the weight of the collective consciousness these days, which is largely driven by things like anxiety and fear, and to sort of be able to sort of put a force field up around yourself and block some of that stuff out and exist as your own universe is, a lot of the goal of magic. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. I mean that just with a sense of spiritual autonomy and energetic autonomy, to not be so infected by the things around you. That stuff is very challenging. And again, we go back to the idea of something that sounds sort of simple doesn't mean it's easy. These are things that can take many lives to achieve, not just one. Whether we're going to be here fulfilling some sort of karmic debt from the past life is a different story. But I think that these small victories are great places to sort of start.
Yeah, and like prior to this pandemic, that means you can't go on tour so easily at the minute and stuff like that. The other pandemic we were facing was a mental health crisis, or still is. Like that's the real pandemic the world faces.
Yeah. I think we're still facing that as well, and I think maybe that it's probably even worse. It's just been so grossly overshadowed by the pandemic du jour, and I feel like the mental health of individuals sort of being crushed in the gears of the way that we exist right now, because I don't know why we're on this planet, but it's probably not to just work 9 to 5, pay taxes and bills and die. You know what I mean? Like there's probably a greater reason. And I think that's why when people go outside and look at the moon, it can actually sort of satiate some of that desire to be connected to something greater than what we have, in our everyday existence. A lot of us live in very mundane worlds. And I think that, having a little bit of a magical practice and a magical path and a thought process can enrich us and connect us to, sort of deeper, sort of primordial reasons of why we might be here. Because ultimately, like I said, I think, it's probably just not to pay our bills and our taxes and die.
No. No,
It's just a hunch.
it's just a hunch, yeah. Crazy talk. I think this magical practice of yours is taking you somewhere very dangerous. What are you saying coming on my podcast?
It's very wild stuff.
So okay, so if we're not just here to work our asses off, pay taxes, and die, what other purposes could there be for this momentary spark of existence?
I don't even claim to sort of have any answers there or claim to even want to hypothesize around it. But again, going back to being comfortable with the question mark of not knowing is something I can find a sense of hope in. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I find that magic can be something that is so rewarding in that respect, because it does open up the world of possibilities to something more important than the bullshit that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think this is why people often crave, little things, or people might not be even spiritual people or magical people, but they're somehow obsessed with their sun sign and astrology. Why? Because we crave connection to something bigger outside of the sort of limiting sort of myopic space of what we see in front of us, and I think that there has to be some sort of intrinsic primordial craving for that as human beings, because we're very separated from it. The ancient Egyptians or something like that were far less separated from it. They devoted their greatest thinkers of their time to understanding things like death, to understanding things like their connection with the universe. And now we use our greatest thinkers of our time to make cell phones and crypto coins. So, again, like there's just a different set of priority to where, this sort of materialistic existence of hyper materialistic existence of now. And I don't just mean materialism as in like, buying, fucking cell phones and radios and whatever else, other material that we have. I mean like materialism, this sort of like Newtonian ontological sense of material, this idea that, living on a cellular level, this idea that we can only understand what we can see, we're energetic creatures living in an energetic universe, and we don't often give a lot of creed to that. You know what I mean? That's why, we're also chemical beings, but, that would still be material, but we are very much so energetic and chemical beings. And, the idea that I feel like everyone uses the word vibes now, which is kind of funny to me. Yeah. Which is sort of like a diet level of conscious awakening where we are sort of just like, vibrational state, energy and matter are interconvertible. I think we gave Einstein the Nobel Prize for that. The idea that, matter is just condensed energy. So technically everything is energy, but yet we never look at it like that. The idea that humans can communicate non-verbally, through energy, it seems like madness to us. But yet you could be in a room with someone and they can really vivify your spirit. They're like, oh, I just love being around that person. I've got a great vibe. Or you can be around a person that sucks the energy out of you entirely because, we do have vibrations that we're emitting. And those vibrations are oftentimes tethered to the thoughts that we're thinking because the thought has a vibration itself. So this idea that, we can send text messages from our phones across the world and through the air that we don't even understand. We can listen to music through Bluetooth, but yet somehow we don't give the creed to the human body to do the same thing, which is just funny to me. It just seems like you talk like that and people think you're a crazy person. But it's at this point, whether it's people like Rupert Sheldrake, who I believe is a Brit as well, who was sort of deemed a heretic of science at some point for his morphic resonance theories, that, he was doing studies where, how come if you have a dog at home, your dog starts to come to your window when you're a mile away and is excited to see you because it somehow knows you're coming home because of this idea of sort of morphic resonant fields that surround, living bodies, which, again, science doesn't like this stuff because it just can't be proven. Okay, then next, are perhaps front people in a band a good example of what you're describing? One of my previous podcast guests, in fact, Terry Logan, right? I think she's a great example of being able to put out a certain kind of energy. When you see someone live and
whatever that energy of their performance is, you know, whatever that presence, whatever that sort of like ability to sort of like, you know, create this music, like when people have it going on, she describes herself as a diva, right? When people have it going on, like it infects the room. I've never, like on a small, like on a, like, you know, on a small sort of small scale, you know, I've never seen anyone quite like, you know, like Terry has, of like being able to just sort of like send out an energy that can just mesmerize and get this crowd like loving her music, loving the vibe, loving being a part of this thing, right? And is that a good example perhaps of how we?
I think that's a phenomenal example, because that's something that almost everyone has felt. I would feel bad for people that haven't felt that, where you go to a concert and the hair is standing up on your arms because you're, caught in this moment. And I find that great concerts can sort of be this temporary autonomous zones where almost everything around the world just disappears because you're stuck in like that sort of, vivified, spirited moment that is filled with magic. It feels like there's a portal open in the room or something. And people love that. Concerts are so important for that, because, the idea is that the performers are existing in that sort of exalted vibration. They're performing their art, their true will. As a performer myself, I always say, if I'm thinking, I'm not performing. When I'm on stage, if I'm thinking about anything, that's not me performing. I have to sort of be in a flow state where I'm not thinking about anything. I'm very much so just, I don't even know like what's happening. It's hard for me to explain. But when an artist or an athlete or someone is in that flow state, or any individual is in that flow state, it's really an exalted sort of higher vibration that is absolutely pure magic. And I think that these are the things I'm talking about, where there isn't metrics to describe this stuff. There is barely language to describe it, as I kind of fumble over trying to explain it. It's like, these are things that I go back to that great question mark of these sort of subtle energies that are there, but yet somehow we still like to go, oh yeah, that's bullshit, or at least a lot of people do. I think maybe less people are doing that. I think we're becoming a little bit more aware of that. Like, the lexicon of, like I said, the word vibe just seems like, oh, that the great vibes, man. Or, oh yeah, that's just vibes. Like, we're seeing it sort of subtly weave its way in there because it's been there all along.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm raising my vibration. I hear that one a lot.
Yeah, totally. So I think people are sort of becoming aware of this stuff. But again, I do think that there's a limited language that surrounds it, that hopefully maybe one day we can continue to evolve.
Yeah. Well, I guess language itself, the word is not the thing.
Yeah, no, the map is not the territory. The word is not the thing. I've been reading a lot of Alfred Korzybski, which, he kind of was very much so someone that Robert Anton Wilson studied. Yeah. Where, he was talking about sort of GS, or general semantics, where, we all kind of talk with this great certainty, as opposed to sort of our consciousness allowing us to expand by virtue of not speaking with the word is. Like how Robert Anton Wilson called it E prime. Yeah. And it's incredibly hard. It's incredibly hard to do, because we've been doing it for so long. And I think people are afraid in the modern world to speak without such certainty, because we're constantly trying to sell each other stuff, and speaking and trying to avoid a sense of absolutism and certainty makes us bad salesmen. Yeah. So I often think about how, this sort of, capitalistic existence, for as long as it probably man has been trading, rocks for food or whatever, who knows? Like we have sort of liked to speak with this sort of exacting certainty and absolutism by using something and saying this is that, as opposed to being like this could be. And I think that, that's part of why the world is going mad a little bit, because I find that if you can train your mind to do that type of thing, it can be really calming. It's incredibly hard to do. You try for a day to dispense the word is from your vocabulary and replace it with something like could be or might be.
Yeah.
And if you do that for an entire day, you're like, oh my God, this is exhausting. But you realize how much we are constantly speaking with great levels of certainty.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like, perhaps, you know, you might feel a greater connection to those you converse with if you're being more, you know, you're being more open, you're being more receptive to...
It'd be a lot less argumentative because
Yeah.
we wouldn't have conversations like, you know, Bach is better than Beethoven, where the grass is green because you say the grass, to me, the grass could be perceived as green, or, you know, Beethoven might be better than Bach. Do you know what I mean? It's like you sort of avoid it altogether because, you know, for example, when people talk about COVID, everyone talks about COVID with such great certainty surrounding the science, and people say, oh, look at the science, but the science is this, but no, none of the science is that. But at the end of the day, I think real scientific thinking is not, see here I'm saying is, again, it's about trying to dispense any sense of true belief, you know, like Robert Anton Wilson said, belief is the death of intelligence, because the idea that here we are, you know, freezing a thought form, and now that's an absolute, and that's what a belief is. So, you know, never be afraid to change those beliefs.
Yeah, yeah, and it sort of takes us full circle, like, to that idea that, like, the, you know, magical thinking enables us to sort of examine our beliefs and, like, you know, feel less attached, feel more able to sort of let go. I mean, like, even right off at the start of the conversation, right, you know, your whole magical journey is taking you through various stages, you know, and, like, that wouldn't have happened if you weren't letting go of your beliefs, and presumably anyway. Yeah. So let's talk about drugs then. How do drugs and magic go together, Lex?
Well, it's funny because that's what they had asked, you know, writing an afterword for Robert Anton Wilson's Sex, Drugs, and Magic.
Yeah.
You know, as they reached out to me and asked me if I'd like to be part of it, because I think Grant Morrison recommended them that I do something like that, as I've had a fair amount of experience with all three of those things. And I tried to kind of find a different approach to it as I sat around brainstorming. And, you know, the thing I compared them to and created a corollary to was, you know, the alchemical primes of salt, sulfur, and mercury. And, you know, for those of you who want to read more about that, pick up Sex, Drugs, and Magic, the repress by, you know, I think it's Hilaritas Press.
That's right.
From the Robert Anton Wilson estate. But really, to kind of, you know, give the broad strokes there, is that I think drugs can be a catalyst or an accelerant. And I try and break down Sex, Drugs, and Magic into the sort of intellectual or energetic forms, going back to energy, where energy can be three things. It can be deficient, it can be balanced, or it can be excess. So when dealing with any of these things, you have to be very wary of, you know, going into excess or being deficient in that respect. And the goal is to obviously stay balanced. So, you know, I think that, you know, a psychedelic experience can be very rewarding. In that it can kind of cleanse the doors of perception, as Huxley put it in his book, The Doors of Perception, where, you know, it can really provide some unique perspectives on finding that sort of exalted state. You know, the idea that shamans use drugs, you know, since ancient history, to sort of find that higher consciousness, to find that new state. And again, like, there's also stories of Timothy Leary, you know, bringing LSD to Buddhist monks and tripping with them, and it did nothing to the Buddhist monks. Why? Because they're already there, you know. So to me, it's like drugs are like taking a helicopter up to the top of the mountain, where you didn't climb the mountain, but it will temporarily put you up there. But then afterwards, you have to come off regardless. So it's not like you're going to have any of the reward of the lessons of the journey, but it will give you some perspective of what it's like there. Yeah. You know, so it can give you a sense of, okay, cool. Like, I understand what that's like now. It can knock you off, you know, whatever rut you were in. And then you can maybe, you know, still get there and do that work. You still have to do the work, but it can be a little bit of an accelerant or a little bit of a catalyst, which I think can be important, but also, you know, have you ever seen the movie Holy Mountain by Jodorowsky?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, you know when he's in the
times.
Pantheon bar, when
Yeah.
they're at the Pantheon bar and everyone's drinking and doping and doing drugs, and they're like, man, why climb the mountain? Just hang at the Pantheon bar and get high, you know? And then there's the one guy who can travel through the mountain as opposed to up the mountain. And it's like, that's sort of the sort of allegory there, where it's like, you know, don't get caught up in, you know, the drugs are not the answer, but potentially, you know, an accelerant or a catalyst to sort of magical thinking. But certainly, you know, an excess of drugs, I've lost a lot of good friends to drugs. Drugs are not something to be, you know, messed with. Don't take drugs when you're like, as a search for, like, you should already be in a pretty good place before you start to experiment with drugs. I don't think drugs should be like, oh my God, here I am, I'm broken at the bottom, I'm going to try and find a magical path, let me start doing drugs. Like, that should not be stage one. So you know, that's my public service.
And like, you know, I think, like, you know, that excess is a very easy pattern to slip into with drugs. And like Timothy Leary himself, right, he was very cautious, very careful, like, you know, about how he wanted to see LSD used for the benefit of sort of like, you know, brain change, imprint change, and that kind of thing. He wasn't an advocate, you know, of just taking it. And like you were describing there, really, I think, like, oh right, I'm feeling broken, I'm feeling my worst, I'll use some drugs for a magical experience. That's when you're likely to move into the realm of excess, because like. You know, because you didn't have
a magical foundation there, and I feel like if you just use it to say, okay, this is now what magic is to me, it's not. You should have the discipline prior. You know, it should be something that needs to be earned. You should be, you know, sort of on your way of the magical path, and you need to sort of, you know, you should be halfway up the mountain before you try and, you know, cheat the mountain. You know. Yeah,
I mean, like, I would say so. Well, my sort of like my most profound experiences in that realm came like when I was in the jungle in Peru, the Amazon jungle there, stopping with a shaman, and like drinking the plant medicine ayahuasca. Now, that, like, you know, it's funny because you mentioned, you know, higher power, and what is that? When the first ceremony I partook in was brought to a close, and we were allowed to communicate again, and that, like, one of the first things I said was like, oh my God, that was amazing. I just had an ego death and I met my higher power.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a lot of friends that do ayahuasca ritual as well. And, you know, I, for one, have not done ayahuasca. And I'm not saying I won't, but I just, you know, I've done a ton of psychedelic drugs in my day, and I'm not sure I need to do ayahuasca. As my, you know, my drug existence, I try and keep behind me. But, you know, to me, from whenever I talk to my friends who've done ayahuasca ritual, it seems tremendously rewarding. And I feel like because it's sort of done in a more ritual space in that respect, I feel like people take a lot from it, as opposed to like, yeah, I did a handful of mushrooms at a music festival and hung out with my friends. Like, maybe that's not going to be the most rewarding magical experience. Maybe it is, but also the idea that, like, you know, I think that drug experimentation and what I'll call psychonautic experimentation, you know, the idea of sort of sailing one's mind and exploring it, you know, is an inward search. It's not an outward search. You know, the idea of you know, looking for answers externally by doing drugs is an external thing and going out and partying. That's not what you're going to find that soul searching. It's about sort of going this way, you know?
And like, and for me, sort of like, you know, my little quest to the jungle was very much a calling. You know, you're sort of saying there, you know, you don't necessarily feel especially drawn to it. You know, like I definitely, you know, for the very first time I heard, I was like, oh, I've got to try this one day, you know, and the day came when I did it, and just because I got, like, you know, I got a lot of high reward out of it, or a lot, like, you know, certainly a lot of change. It helped me put some of my sort of like bad drug habits behind me, like my time out there in the jungle, for example. You know, it definitely doesn't necessarily mean it's for everyone. It's funny as well, you mentioned, like when I was young, when I was sick, you mentioned something like taking mushrooms at a festival, not necessarily being the greatest way to, like, and I totally agree. But like when I was young and I was first sort of like discovering drugs, I was only 16, I was smoking a bit of weed and all that kind of stuff. And I discovered like a mile walk away from my house was a field where magic mushrooms grew. And like I could just pick them, and and it worked, and it was free. And I didn't know, and obviously I didn't know what I was doing, right? And like the ones over here in the UK are pretty small, and like you 50 will give you like a pretty decent hit. Well, I didn't know what I was doing, so I did a brew of like 200 of these things, drank it, went out with my friends. But like I did have this most amazing sort of like. Very fortunately, I had this most amazing sort of like psychedelic shamanic vision. And I was trying, like, and they were all drinking, and we got out of this college bar, and I was trying to explain to them what I was seeing and what was being revealed to me. And they were like, I wish you hadn't taken them mushrooms. And I was like, no, but existence is like it's a continue, like everything grows outwards, but everything grows inwards. And when you get to the smallest point inwards, you meet the largest point outwards, and there's no need to ever be scared again.
And mushrooms can be so fun and so like, they can just make everything into this wild little adventure journey that you can like, learn so much from. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're like in Lord of the Rings in your head. Like, oh, we got to get up to the mountain. We got to do the thing. We got to throw the ring in there. And it's like all of a sudden, like, and that stuff is great. And I do think that like, a great mushroom trip with a friend can be something that is like, you'll never forget. And that stuff's really special. I do think nature has to be involved in it in one way or another, though. I think, doing psychedelic drugs in, observing the natural world and the environment. You can stare at a leaf for an hour and look at the way the pattern of the leaf is growing. Next thing you know, you can see like the majesty of Mother Nature. It's like that stuff I do think is important to it, though. Like doing it, inside, like a concert hall or something like that. Maybe not so much. Like sure that can be fun, to stare at a bunch of crazy lights and listen to techno music, but I'm not sure that's where you're going to get your sort of really exalted spiritual journey from. Maybe you can.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I had that kind of experience when I was kind of young, and B, I didn't know what I was doing, but like, I like it sort of sticks out as a bit of a one-off, really.
No, that's special.
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. And like, that was the nice thing about being in the jungle for the ayahuasca experience, how intimate and important the jungle experience is. You're in this hut, and there's sort of like there's big gaps in the side of it, and like the wind's coming through, and you can hit the sounds of the jungle sort of like play into the experience and all that. Like, you are
sounds amazing.
You are really close to nature. And like, and I felt like this tree, like, because you have to dash to the toilet like during ceremony a few times, like, and after a while, like after a few ceremonies, I realized like this tree always seemed to help me. It always seemed to be there as I was stumbling through the darkness to get this toilet. I was resting, and like you just feel that them sort of spirits.
And especially when you're dealing with, you're talking about plant medicine, you're talking about things that came from nature. The idea that that stuff was designed by this planet, and now you're ingesting it. You'd like to think that you should probably be more connected to an environment like that, which that seems really cool.
Yeah. It was life changing for me. Cool. Yep. So,
how many times did you do that? I'm curious. Was it like sort of a one and done, or was it like, okay, cool, I did that, now I want to try it again and sort of, take a deeper dive into it and better understand it? Because I imagine the first time's pretty daunting. So yeah. I imagine, you sort of like look back and say, okay, cool, I gotta do it again and see what this is all about again.
Well, it was like the first ceremony. I mean, like it's always pretty daunting, but the first ceremony was particularly daunting. And like the shaman, what he does on your first time, he gives you half a cup. But the trainee shamans who were there, who'd sort of like gave us the guidance and stuff like that, sort of said to me, like when he plays this drum in the ceremony, it's called the happy drum, which was about an hour or so in, I think. Your sense of time goes like, if you do want to have another half a cup, that's the time to do it. And like, and I could feel the half a cup. I was having 4 ceremonies in total while I was there, and I could feel it. And I said to the spirit of ayahuasca, I said like, I want to I don't want to do ayahuasca light. I want to go ayahuasca deep. And she said, I'm ready to take you deeper. So I went up to the altar and got my other half cup of ayahuasca. So I had like 4 ceremonies in the jungle. And like, kind of interestingly enough, one of the training shamans who was there, she was very close to graduating or whatever it is shamans do. She's only a couple of months away, you know. And she now comes to the UK quite a bit. So like I tend to do a ceremony. So I tend to do a ceremony a year. So I did 4 in Peru, and I've done 4 back here.
Yeah. So it's sort of you know, something that lasts with you for quite some time, and then it's like now to hit the reset button annually type of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like the opposite to microdosing, where people, you know, like, and instead I do like a heroic dose once a year, you know. And like, but I think the other thing, you know, what you were saying, like, you know, like sort of like, you know, really understanding that, like, when you've got to the top of the mountain here, you haven't climbed it, you've got bolstered up here, and like whatever sort of healing, whatever teaching you receive while you're there, when you get back, you've got to integrate that, like, you know, and like, you know, you've got to like put the discipline in to make it, you know, to integrate it into your life, you know. And I don't think that's necessary. Yeah, that's not necessarily always straightforward, you know, like, and yeah, and you know,
it's like you're on the mountain and you're looking down, but you still don't fully understand the course to get up there. You just have new perspective from up there. And then the idea that you still have to climb a mountain yourself and figure out how to get to that spot. Not saying you're going to get back to a spot where you're tripping balls again, but whatever sort of, you know, information that your body received into sort of, you know, new perspectives, I feel like to incorporate those things, are probably hugely challenging.
But what I did was, like it is standard practice, standard advice, is I kept an ayahuasca diary, because she will tell you a lot. She would like, she won't, like, you know, she will give you, like, you know, tell you what to do and that kind of thing, you know. So, and it really, because however profound it is, it really helps if the next day you write it all down in as much detail, every little thing, because it's amazing how much of it slips. And so it's not like you know, there are like, you know, like she told me to go back and study with one of my old yoga teachers. With the yoga teacher I'd always had the best connection with, like, and so, like, you know, I've done that, and she's, you know, she's taught me a lot about Ayurvedic practice, and I do yoga sort of like 5 times a week now.
When you say she, you're referring to sort of Mama Ayahuasca.
Yeah.
When you say she, sorry, okay, cool. Just want to clear that.
Yeah, sorry, Mother Ayahuasca. Yeah, it's definitely a very feminine spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear a lot of people refer to it like that, and it's interesting that it gives you some specific information like that. I think that's really cool.
But like, I think you have to write. Definitely writing it all down was really, like, you know, is a part of the process. And like my last ceremony here in the UK, you know, like when you prepare for it, you know, you got to follow a very strict diet for at least a couple of weeks and that kind of thing. Yeah. And it was the first one back here where I really sort of was like, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to absolutely commit to this. And I wrote my intention down beforehand, like good, like, and it was the one I got the most out of. It was like, okay, yeah, you do have to, like, if you want, you know, part of it is your embracing as well.
Yeah, you got to put in the work on the front end, the back end. Yeah. Even on it, apparently, you have to take notes while you're on it. So it seems like, it's work. You know, it's you can't escape the work.
Yeah, man. So, like, so if if there is a risk of excess and, you know, the pleasure of instant gratification, all of which is fine, you know, like, but like, how do we get the right balance? How do we avoid?
I think, you know, that's a question that during, you know, your self-auditing one has to find. You know, we all know when we're taking too much. You know, I myself have struggled with addiction in my life, and I was very aware of that. You know what I mean? Whether or not you want to, you know, deny certain things, you know, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to understand when something is controlling your life, because the goal is to not let a chemical control you. The goal is to sort of, you know, free yourself in the process, not be in a chemical prison. And the one thing you do have to remember is the human brain can create any chemical that we could ever create in a lab or that any plant could create. The human brain already has the intrinsic properties of doing that. So the idea is to sort of allow yourself, you know, whether or not, you know, you're getting addicted to opiates, or you're getting addicted to, amphetamines. You're getting addicted to things that are creating serotonin and dopamine and all these things that are basically firing neurochemicals that make you feel good. But the idea is that those things can be produced naturally in your body.
Yeah.
And the more you incorporate them as foreign objects, is the less your body's going to be naturally producing that because it doesn't need to anymore. So the idea that, when you do take that away and your brain is no longer creating those things, that you're going to go, oh my God, I feel like fucking shit. I need to now use that again. So you don't ever want to be there. And I think it's really important to sort of be aware of that, and not let yourself just sort of, like addiction happens in like a slippery slope too. It's not something you're just like, oh, I woke up and I'm addicted. It's a gradual process that you just have to sort of be aware of and use the discipline of knowing that, if you do something like, depending on the drug, you have to be very aware of its addictive properties. You have to be very aware of how to use something in a way that you can ensure that you won't be addicted. If it's a little treat here and there, it's like, shit, it's like eating sugar, on the weekends only or something. You know what I mean? If you do it every fucking day, your body and your gut flora is going to crave it. You're going to feel like shit without it. So it's like, we just have to sort of use temperance to sort of, make sure that our bodies are dependent on anything other than our own self.
I mean, to me, right, like I think like an idea that's coming through talking about sort of like this sort of sense of autonomy, this sense of sort of like, being aware of our own world, our own energetic presence, like, not being beholden to chemicals and that kind of thing. There's a there's a lot of freedom in all of that. That's what I'm thinking, Lex. There's a lot of freedom.
Absolutely. I'm, this idea of self-reliance, self-autonomy, self-sovereignty. You have to be the monarch of your own vessel here. You have to sort of be that's the goal. Through a sense of wellness. You have to be able to heal yourself. You have to be able to listen to yourself. I even think was that Joe Dorosky, where it's like you have to, come back as your own mother, your own father, your own sister, your own brother, your own lover. You have to sort of be all these things. And when you sort of do that, you will be, you'll be able to, you can't love someone else unless you love yourself. You can't do any of these things unless you've sort of found at least some sort of, peace within yourself. And, I think that magic is an exploration of that. And I think that a sense of freedom and autonomy in there is something that, in self-governance, the idea of going back to this sense of discipline there. It's not a hedonistic or pleasure-seeking mission. It's oftentimes, a discipline aspect. And, you can achieve an ecstatic state through fasting, much like you can through drugs. There's all sorts of practices in there. And, one is addition, one is subtraction. I think it's important to subtract as well as add sometimes. Those things are equally as important. Taking away and stripping down, you can notice that, like, if you fast for like 3 days or something like this,
wow,
or even 2 days or 1 day, you will notice that everything that you put in your body, because when you're constantly putting shit in your body, you don't know how you're reacting to it. Because you're like, oh, there's just so much in me. I did this today, that, blah, blah, blah. You don't know what's making you feel like what. But if you take away everything you put in it from there, you're going to know exactly how that makes you feel.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which I think is important to try a little bit of fasting in there. I think the body was built for famine. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to starve after not eating for a day. You feel like you will. But then you're going to eat a banana. You're going to know exactly how the banana made you feel. You're going to have, whatever you have from that point on, you're going to feel it in your body. And I think it's important to create that sense of dialogue with yourself if you are going to sort of learn this vessel in its entirety, from the mind, body, spirit. Going back to that sort of salt, sulfur, and mercury, which is the sort of alchemical analogies for mind, body, and spirit. So yeah, I agree.
Wow, yeah, I guess being hungry isn't something we very much encourage in our culture. I mean, 24 hours, 36 hours probably is about the best I've managed to do with a fast. But one of the things I find, when I get my act together enough to do that, is how much better, how much more focused my discipline is afterwards. Like you know, it's a very good reset for sort of like taking control of your choices, especially for me. Like, you know, I'll eat a lot less donuts for a month if I had a fast at the start of it, because like I'm just in better control of my eating habits as by virtue of doing it. And I think that you sort of saying the body was, you know, the body's part of the body cycle is experiencing famine. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but I think is it after 3 days or 4 days of fasting, the body ejects all precancerous cells or something like that, you know?
Yeah, no. Again, I mean, like, my father is also a holistic doctor with a PhD in psychology and nutrition. So like I was sort of raised with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
He wasn't very much so like, openly into magic, but like, as a Taoist, it's very similar to sort of magical thinking as well, because he's a Taoist. For me, like that was stuff that I was sort of raised in that respect and learning these things. And I was very fortunate to be aware of, when we talk about everything we put in our body has an energy from whether it's the plant that we're eating or the meat that we're eating or the processed food that we're eating. All these things have energies to them, not just living things. Everything has an energy to it. And that will affect the energy and not as well as the chemical and cellular existence that you have in your vessel. So we all have to be very mindful of that, especially with food. I mean, like we're all guilty of that. We grab something, we're in a hurry. We say, oh shit, whatever. I just need to put something in me. I need some fuel. But man, like the more you really do take a mindful approach to what kind of fuel we put in our bodies, like you wouldn't put just regular old unleaded fuel in your Ferrari. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to decide on what type of vessel we're going to be here. Yeah. And I think it's really important, to sort of understand the yeses and the nos of what we decide to put in our body. And I think that's important.
Yeah, well, it's the one thing that will be with you from the beginning to the end of this existence, right?
Yeah.
So,
to a certain extent.
So Lex, I've had you now for an hour. Is there anything more? Is there anything you want to conclude on about magic?
No problem. I mean, I can ramble on this stuff forever. I just like talking about magic stuff and the human experience and all the weirdness that goes along with it.
Fantastic. But could I just ask you a little bit about industrial music before we say goodbye? Is that all right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, how did you discover industrial music? Sort of like, what was sort of your journey into that world?
Well, it was, the magical era of the 90s, of course, not to date myself, but, I was fortunate to have an older brother who was then a father of musicians. And, my brother being in, metal bands and such, when we were younger, I would sort of, borrow CDs from him and get insights from him. And so I was sort of already into getting into heavy music at the time. But then for me, it was sort of bands like Skinny Puppy and Ministry that sort of sent me down a rabbit hole of something that I just found to be so astounding. Hang on a second. Someone's trying to call me on. But yeah, I just found something about industrial music to be so much more pissed off than most things that I had listened to. And, as being an angsty young kid, I found it to sort of speak to some of the stuff that just resonated with me. And it wasn't that it was heavier than metal. It just sort of felt like a way to suck the poison out of a mass production society and spit it back in its own face. Even the fact that it was called industrial music, everything about it just resonated with me. Yeah. And it wasn't until obviously far later that I decided to kind of throw my hat in the ring and sort of make industrial music. But I liked it also because no band sounded like the other bands. It was almost like the term industrial music wasn't defining a soundscape, but rather an attitude. And I thought something about that was really interesting because, after a while, all metal music sort of ends up sounding the same. But industrial music, it could almost seem like it could be anything from, someone, banging on some industrial gear to, some chainsaw guitar riffs to like, some weird, crazy vocal distortion and noise. Like it just seemed like it had no formula or it had no rules. It was an experimental genre that to me was sort of, it was exciting because of that. And I also think that that's what drew me into it, because it wasn't like there was many gatekeepers where metal has a lot of gatekeepers. Oh, it needs to have a blast beat and this sort of Cookie Monster vocal and sound like this. But for me, industrial music was like, it's anything you really want it to be at that point. And I like not having to paint myself in a corner and sort of do whatever the hell I wanted. So yeah, I don't know. Industrial music for me it's always a great debate too about what is industrial music and what isn't, because it seems like no one fully knows.
Well, that's the beauty, right? And I think that's a really interesting point. You can have something that is quite sort of heavy and metally sounding and guitar heavy, but is definitely falls into that category. Or you could have something that has no guitars at all and is like sort of keyboardy and programmed drum machine.
Like some sort of like, synth and a drum machine and like, a weird Arabic vocal on top of it. You go, oh, that's industrial music. You know what I mean? It seems to have no rules, which again, I just love that. I loved how it had no sort of lines drawn to it.
I mean, here in the UK, again, like it was the 90s for me, that magical time. And like there was in the UK, there was sort of like two places you sort of would tend to hear good music. And one would be like a radio show by a DJ called John Peel. And the other would be at like your indie disco. And I was very lucky. Our local indie disco was great, actually. And I discovered many great bands there. But they just started playing this song, and it just went, hey, get up, get on your feet. And it was just like, I remember the first, I was like, whoa, what's this? I've not had anything quite like this. And then, just sort of like, wow, like, as the weeks went by, playing it every week, I was like, I really like this, And obviously it was Thieves by The Ministry, and that was my introduction.
Of course, yeah.
Funny you should mention Skinny Puppy as well, because I heard them in a record shop. They were playing Too Dark Park, and I was just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, and there was like, there's a lot of interesting crossover between industrial music and sort of Discordian and magical thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Bands like, like in Genesis P. Origin and Psychic TV and all this sort of interesting sort of world of, like there was a little bit more intention, I thought, to industrial music than say something like just metal music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can only sing so many songs about, death and obliteration and, maybe a Lovecraft song or, you know what I mean? Like I felt like metal music, it had its tropes and it existed that way, but I felt like something about industrial music, just again, it sort of, it was a little bit more expansive for me. Yeah.
Cool. Brilliant. And are you working on anything at the minute?
We are. We've actually been working on a record for the entirety of COVID, which is going to hopefully come out this year. Not hopefully, it will come out this year.
Nice.
Probably later in the year, maybe around late summer or something like that. And then, if the world seems to open back up, we do have quite a bit of touring plans that put us through the UK with another band that I'm not allowed to say right now because we haven't announced the tour.
Yeah.
But I think you might have just touched on it. That's my hint.
Oh wow! Yeah. I'm going to keep my eyes open for that then.
Yeah, I'll certainly let you know. It'll be great. We can have a pint over there and catch up after the show. And yeah, I'd like to have you as my guest. That'd be fun.
Oh, wicked.
So we've got a ton of stuff coming. We'll start rolling out singles as early as March, and some fun music videos and all that. So yeah, it'll be good.
Nice one. Okay, well, that's something to look forward to. Brilliant. Well, thank you for finding an hour of your time today, Lex. I really enjoyed talking to you and like getting you sort of like lowdown on magical thinking, magical ways of being, and and just sort of like much respect to all that sort of knowledge and everything you've got there. I'm really, really, really chuffed that you would come on and you'd share that with me and our podcast listeners. Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely, Jamie. Thanks for having me, man. It was a pleasure chatting with you. We should do it again sometime. And
yeah, definitely up for it. And if people have been listening to this and they want to find you, is there any what's and I'll put links in the show notes, man.
Just Google the number 3 and the word teeth. No spaces, and you'll find it all.
Wicked. Okay. Right, well, thank you very much. Yeah, peace out, man.
Take care, buddy. Peace.
Bye. Thank you very much for tuning in to the F23 podcast. Thank you, Lex, for that fantastic conversation. It was so good getting to spend that hour with you. Thank you to OK Comics for sponsoring this episode. The link to their store will be in the show notes. Thank you all for listening. I have a little favour to ask. If you can, please subscribe, like, comment, share, rate this podcast. Actions like that really help make it visible, really help bring me new listeners, and I really, really appreciate it if you could find the time to do that. Coming up next, we're going to have Grant Morrison, so keep your ears open for that. Nothing much more to say other than Hail Eris!